April 8, 1943, Northern France. The morning mist hasn't yet burned away, and the air smells like wet soil and engine oil. Over the grey horizon, sunlight flashes on polished metal. A new kind of aircraft, vast and heavy, pushing through the clouds with the grace of a freight train. Down below, at an airfield near Saint-Omer, a group of Luftwaffe aces lounge beside their Focke-Wulf 190s. Cigarette smoke curls through the damp air. Someone points up and laughs. Was ist das? Ein fliegender Milchkännchen? A flying milk jug. They watch the enormous stranger lumber overhead, fat and glinting, its propeller chopping the sky like an axe. It looks absurd. A metal whale among hawks. The German pilots are veterans. They've danced through the skies of Poland, France, and Russia, tallying kills like chess victories. They know the language of flight, the weight of a dive, the shudder before a stall, the geometry of a perfect shot. To them, this thing above looks like an insult to aerodynamics. One of them, Oberleutnant Heinrich Keller, grins as he lowers his binoculars. American engineering, he says. Big, slow, stupid, just like their tanks. The others laugh. The joke travels down the flight line. The milk bottle, the flying refrigerator, the Yankee joke. In the next moment, the air raid siren wails. Engines roar to life. Dust and exhaust whip across the tarmac as Keller's squadron takes off, spiraling upward to meet the intruders. The new American fighters are already climbing higher, forming tight, glinting formations. The German radio crackles with chatter, orders, warnings, curses. At 25,000 feet, the thin air freezes breath. The sky above France becomes a stage for a duel neither side yet understands. Keller spots one of the Americans and dives, his Focke-Wulf slicing through the air like a scalpel. The P-47 looks sluggish, too slow to turn. Keller lines up his shot, presses the trigger. But before his rounds connect, the milk jug rolls onto its back and dives like a falling anvil. The move is suicidal. No plane that heavy can recover. Keller follows, ready to finish the kill. Then something impossible happens. The American machine doesn't break apart. It accelerates. Gravity turns the juggernaut into a bullet. Keller's altimeter spins down. The Thunderbolt vanishes into cloud, leaving turbulence and disbelief in its wake. Keller pulls out too late. His wings tremble at the edge of structural failure. When he levels off, the American is gone. That evening, the German pilots trade stories over black bread and schnapps. They're still laughing, but it's uneasy laughter now. One of them swears the big American had 8 guns, not 2, not 4, but 8, each vomiting fire. Another claims it shrugged off a full burst from a 20-millimeter cannon. Impossible, says Keller. Yet the memory of that sudden dive gnaws at him, the way it plunged like a stone and never died. The war in the air is changing, and no one in that dimly lit mess hall realizes it yet. Across the channel, in a hangar in southern England, young American pilots stand in a circle around the same monster the Germans mocked. The name painted on its side reads Thunderbolt. The nickname on everyone's lips, Jug. Lieutenant Mark Tex Reynolds, 23, a former crop duster from Oklahoma, stares up at it, arms crossed. Looks like a goddamn tractor with wings, he mutters. Laughter ripples through the group, half nervous, half genuine. Behind them, mechanics in greasy coveralls wipe oil from their hands, pretending not to hear. Major Don Blakesley, commander of the 4th Fighter Group, steps forward. He'd flown Spitfires before, elegant, razor-sharp machines. The Jug is none of that. It's a brute. "Gentlemen," he says, tapping the fuselage. "You may not love her looks, you'll learn to love what she does." Outside, the engines cough to life one by one, each rumble shaking the hangar walls. The sound isn't elegant like the British Merlins. It's deeper, rougher, a mechanical heartbeat with too much whiskey in its veins. Tex climbs the ladder and slides into the cockpit. The seat is wide, the controls solid, almost agricultural. The canopy smells of fuel and paint. He looks at the instrument panel, at the absurdly long list of gauges, levers, and warning lights. "Feels like flying a damn boiler room," he mutters into his oxygen mask. Then the tower gives the signal. He throttles forward. The Jug begins its long, stubborn run across the grass airfield. For a moment it feels like it'll never lift. Then with a grunt and a surge, it heaves itself into the air. The control stick is heavy, uncooperative. But once it climbs through 10,000 feet, the machine steadies. It feels unshakable. Below, England recedes into a patchwork of green and smoke. Ahead, the Channel, and beyond it, enemy territory. Tex joins formation, the thunderbolts glinting around him like steel giants. His wingman's voice crackles through the radio. "You think this thing can actually dogfight?" Tex grins. "Don't know. But if she can take a hit better than me, I'll stick with her." Minutes later, they cross the French coast. The mission? Fighter sweep near Rouen. The sky is quiet. Too quiet. Then black dots appear ahead, closing fast. The Luftwaffe. The first real test begins. A Messerschmitt dives through the formation, guns blazing. The P-47s scatter, slow, uncoordinated. Tex jerks the stick. The plane lumbers like a drunk bull. Tracers whip past his canopy. He curses, tries to turn with the German. A mistake. The lighter fighter swings behind him instantly. Tex feels the bullets hammer the tail, feels the plane shudder. "She's hit!" he shouts. Smoke trails behind him. But the Thunderbolt doesn't break apart. He levels off, breathless. The instrument's still red-green. The engine, that monstrous radial heart, still roars. "Holy hell," he breathes. "She's still flying." By the time they limp back across the Channel, half the squadron is missing. The radio silence, the chaos, the humiliation. It's a hard baptism. The debriefing room smells of coffee and burnt nerves. Blakesley stands before them, grim. "Gentlemen," he says, "today was rough. But this plane isn't a Spitfire. You can't dance with it. You've got to fight with it. Use what she's got, her power, her altitude. Learn that, and the Luftwaffe won't be laughing long." Outside, the rain starts again. The British ground crews work through the night, replacing bullet-riddled panels, patching holes, painting new names on fresh fuselages. Each one looks the same. Stubby nose, broad wings, brute confidence. The laughter across the Channel continues, for now, because none of them yet understand what's coming. The industrial storm. The new doctrine. The birth of a machine built not to duel, but to dominate. And somewhere, in the rumble of the Pratt Whitney engine cooling in the night, history is already changing its tone. In the spring of 1942, while Europe burned, the world's most powerful piston engine was still a set of blueprints and half-assembled cylinders in a Connecticut workshop. Its name: Pratt Whitney R-2800 Double Wasp. 18 cylinders arranged in 2 tight circles, each one the size of a milk can, pushing out a thunderous 2,000 horsepower. The engine was too big for almost anything that flew, except for one mad design that would make sense of it. In a cluttered office at Republic Aviation in Farmingdale, Long Island, a Georgian immigrant named Alexander Kartveli was sketching the future of air war. His desk was a battlefield of rulers, cigars, and empty coffee mugs. On the wall behind him hung a blueprint labeled XP-47B. To most who saw it, it looked insane. The fuselage was massive, the wings thick as a barn door. Engineers muttered that the thing would never leave the ground. Kartveli just smiled. "It will be a dinosaur," he said, his accent curling around every syllable. "But it will be a dinosaur with good proportions." He wasn't trying to build a pretty airplane. He was trying to build an invincible one. At the time, American fighter doctrine was stuck in the 1930s. Fast, light interceptors with small engines and smaller guns. But Europe was proving that war in the air was no longer about grace. It was about survival and altitude. The German Bf-109s and FW-190s ruled the middle skies, shredding bombers with surgical precision. Kartveli's challenge was to build something that could climb higher than anything the Luftwaffe had ever faced, and still bring the fight back down. The result was an aircraft that looked less like a bird and more like a tank pretending to fly. When the first prototype rolled out in early 1942, ground crews gathered to stare. The plane's nose was dominated by the circular maw of the R-2800, framed by a propeller so large that the landing gear had to be comically tall to keep the blades from chewing into the runway. Its wings stretched 40 feet across. Fully loaded, it weighed more than some bombers. Test pilot Lowry Brabham climbed in for the maiden flight on May 6, 1941. The airfield went silent. Mechanics held their breath as the engine coughed, sputtered, then roared to life like an artillery barrage. When Brabham opened the throttle, the plane lurched forward, reluctant, like a beast being dragged from a cave. It needed nearly the entire runway before it finally tore itself from the earth. The jug, that's what the ground crews called it now, lumbered upward, nose high, wobbling. From the ground, it looked wrong, ungainly, almost comedic. But when it landed 30 minutes later, Brabham climbed out and said only one thing: "She's heavy, but she's got guts." The Army brass didn't know what to make of it. They wanted an interceptor, not a flying fortress. But Kartveli was persuasive. He argued that the future of air war wasn't in dogfighting, it was in high-altitude power and range. "You don't chase the enemy," he told them. "You make him come to you. And when he does, you kill him with physics." The production order was signed. The XP-47B became the Republic P-47 Thunderbolt. By the time the first squadrons received their aircraft in England, the war in the air was already a slaughterhouse. The 8th Air Force's daylight bombing campaign was bleeding pilots. German interceptors tore through the B-17 formations with ease. Escort fighters like the P-38 and the Spitfire couldn't go the full distance. The Thunderbolt was supposed to fix that. But on arrival, it looked like a logistical nightmare. Pilots, fresh from Spitfire cockpits, stared at their new mounts in disbelief. One of them wrote in his diary, "It looks like someone grafted a battleship to a propeller." The cockpit was spacious, but crude. Metal everywhere, thick framing, controls heavy as lead. The aircraft guzzled fuel like a drunk sailor. Its climb rate was dreadful. Its takeoff rolled dangerously long for England's small airfields. When the 4th Fighter Group switched from Spitfires to Thunderbolts in March 1943, morale collapsed. "We went from ballet dancers to bulldozers," one pilot later said. Their first missions were humiliating. Radios failed. Engines overheated. On April 8, 1943, their combat debut ended in chaos. German fighters arrived, the Thunderbolts couldn't coordinate, and several never made it home. The Luftwaffe intelligence report that followed was smug. New American fighter, heavy and clumsy. No threat to experienced pilots. In the mess halls of occupied France, laughter echoed again. But among the American engineers, there was no panic. The problems were teething issues. Bad radios, poor tactics, pilots still flying as if they were in Spitfires. The real secrets of the Thunderbolt hadn't yet been unleashed. That came with altitude. The R-2800 wasn't just a big engine. It was a revolution in metallurgy and design. Each cylinder could withstand pressures that would tear older engines apart. And attached to it was something few pilots understood. A turbo supercharger system that made the Jug a completely different animal above 25,000 feet. Instead of stealing power from the engine like a traditional mechanical supercharger, the turbo used exhaust gases, waste energy, to spin a turbine in the tail. That turbine compressed air, fed it back through ducts running under the fuselage, and rammed it into the engine's intake. It was an engineering labyrinth of pipes and valves, but it worked like alchemy. Up there, where German fighters gasped for air, the P-47 could still breathe freely. While the Luftwaffe's sleek Bf-109s began to falter, the Thunderbolt's power curve just kept climbing. This invisible advantage would soon rewrite every rule of the air war, but not before more blood was spilled. Early summer 1943. RAF Debden, England. Lieutenant Tex Reynolds leans against the wing of his Jug, smoking in silence. His friend, Lieutenant William "Bucky" Harris, jokes that they should have stayed in the Spitfires. Tex doesn't laugh. The last mission cost them 3 men. "You ever think we're the joke?" he mutters. Before Bucky can answer, the ground crew shouts, "Engine run up." The 2 men climb in. Moments later, 12 Thunderbolts thunder down the runway. The sound shakes the earth. Civilians in nearby villages look up from their fields. They've never heard anything like it. The formation climbs into the clouds, bound for Lille. At 28,000 feet, the world is silver and blue. Then, contact. Black crosses flash below. The Germans are waiting. Tex throttles up. The engine howls, the turbocharger whining like a banshee. He dives. The P-47 plummets faster than he's ever felt. His stomach turns to ice. Below, a Messerschmitt peels up to meet him. Tex lines the gun sight, squeezes the trigger. Nothing. Then he remembers. Arming switch. He flips it. 8 machine guns erupt in unison. The recoil jolts the plane. Tracers streak down like fiery rain. The Messerschmitt disintegrates, the pilot's canopy vanishing in a burst of smoke. Tex pulls up hard, the G-forces crushing him into his seat. "Holy Christ," he gasps. "That's not guns. That's artillery." By the time they return to base, 2 Thunderbolts are gone, but 5 German planes won't fly again. The laughter in France grows quieter. That night, Blakesley walks the flight line, his boots crunching on gravel. He stops by Tex's plane. Holes pepper the wings, oil leaks from the cowl. Yet the Jug still stands, hulking and patient, as if daring anyone to call it weak again. He pats the metal flank and mutters, "You ugly bastard. Maybe you'll win us this war." The wind howls across the empty field. Somewhere over the channel, more Thunderbolts are crossing into darkness. And with them, a new kind of power is about to take command of the skies. The air over northern France is razor thin, cold enough to freeze a man's breath inside his mask. At 30,000 feet, the world stops being blue. It becomes metallic, the color of exhaustion. And here, in this high-altitude void, the Republic P-47 Thunderbolt finally finds its kingdom. For months, the Germans had called it a joke, Too fat, too slow, too American. But up here the joke collapses. The Luftwaffe's sleek fighters choke on the thin air. Their mechanical superchargers cough. Their engines wheeze. The Thunderbolt, on the other hand, roars, its great heart still pounding with full fury. Inside the cockpit, Tex Reynolds pushes the throttle forward. The turbocharger screams like an enraged ghost. The altimeter spins higher. The jug climbs as if gravity itself has loosened its grip. "She likes it up here," he says to himself, a grin breaking through the oxygen mask. Down below, a formation of B-17s trudges toward the German border, silver arrows bristling with gun turrets. Escort duty. The most hated, most important job in the 8th Air Force. Tex's squadron spreads out, black silhouettes against the glare. Then, dots. Dozens of them. Messerschmitts and Fokker-Wulfs climbing fast, looking for easy prey. The Thunderbolts dive to meet them. The first pass is over in seconds, a blur of motion, of fire. A German ace fires a full burst into one P-47's belly. The bullets spark across armor plating, ripping metal. The jug shudders, rolls, then steadies. Smoke trails from its wing, but it keeps flying. The German curses. He pulls up, repositions, and fires again. Same result. The American machine refuses to die. This was the secret no one on either side had truly grasped yet. The P-47 was not an airplane. It was an airborne fortress disguised as a fighter. Its massive radial engine, the Pratt Whitney R-2800, was built like a tank's heart. Air-cooled, simple, unkillable. Where a Spitfire's fragile coolant lines would burst from a single cannon hit, the Thunderbolt could lose an entire cylinder and keep running. Many did. Mechanics began painting small tombstones on the engine cowlings, one for every flight home, with a hole the size of a man's fist through the motor. There were other marvels, too, hidden inside its thick skin. Behind the pilot sat the secret organ that made the jug divine. The turbo supercharger. Exhaust gases, usually wasted as noise and smoke, were channeled through long silver ducts under the fuselage into a turbine that spun faster than any car engine could dream. 20,000 revolutions per minute. That turbine fed compressed air back into the engine, letting it breathe like a god at altitudes where others suffocated. It was an absurd design. Expensive, complicated, and, in the American way, utterly excessive. But it worked. While German fighters lost power above 25,000 feet, the Thunderbolt's horsepower climbed. When the Luftwaffe came hunting, they found the Jug waiting above them, higher, faster, and ready to strike like a falling planet. The pilots called the tactic boom and zoom. No turning fights, no duels. They climbed high, spotted their prey, dove at supersonic-like speeds, fired a storm of lead, and then zoomed back into the heavens before anyone could touch them. And that storm of lead, that was the other revelation. 8 Browning M2 50-caliber machine guns, 4 in each wing. Each fired at 850 rounds per minute. Together, they produced a sound like tearing steel. A single trigger pull hurled 100 bullets every second. High-velocity rounds the size of a man's thumb, each one capable of punching through armor, engine blocks, and even train cars. When all 8 opened up at once, the sky didn't just flash. It vibrated. Pilots described the recoil shaking their teeth. The smell of gunpowder mixed with hot oil filled the cockpit, a perfume of destruction. The Germans began calling it industrial warfare, because that's what it was. Not art, not skill, but manufacturing. Mechanized murder, delivered from the clouds. Major Robert S. Johnson learned that truth the hard way. June 26, 1943, somewhere over France. Johnson's Thunderbolt, half-pint, takes fire from behind. 20mm cannon shells rip through the fuselage. His canopy shatters. Oil floods his goggles. His plane is bleeding smoke. He tries to bail out, but the canopy jammed from the impact. He's trapped. Flames crawl along the side of the cockpit. He dives, hoping the slipstream will blow the fire out. Miraculously it does, but the plane is barely holding together. Then, through the haze, he sees it. A Focke-Wulf 190 closing fast. The German ace, named Egon Meyer, lines up his guns and fires. Cannon shells smash into the jug's tail. The elevator jerks. Johnson grips the stick. The P-47 trembles but refuses to break apart. Meyer dives again, empties his last rounds. When he's out of ammo, he pulls alongside, shaking his head in disbelief. He salutes, a soldier's gesture of respect, and flies away. Johnson limps back across the channel. When they count the holes, there are 221. The plane that should have been scrap metal lands safely. From that day forward, the myth of the indestructible jug is born. Mechanics start calling it the flying tank. German pilots start calling it something else. Der Blechhammer, the hammer of tin. A cruel irony, since the hammer usually falls the other way. By autumn of 1943, the laughter in the Luftwaffe's barracks is gone. Intelligence reports now mark the Thunderbolt as highly dangerous. The same pilots who once mocked it as slow and clumsy now whisper stories of invincible American machines that dive like meteors and spit fire like dragons. And yet, the transformation is only halfway done. In the hangars of England, Republic engineers keep arriving with upgrades. New propellers with broad paddle blades that bite into the air. Bubble canopies that give pilots a full 360-degree view. And clever tweaks to the fuel system to extend range. The jug that first rolled out of Farmingdale is being reborn, piece by piece, into something far deadlier. At night, the pilots drink and talk. They speak of friends lost, of kills earned, of rumors that the Germans are building a jet. Tex Reynolds scribbles in his notebook, "We don't have to be faster, we just have to be harder to kill." The philosophy of the Thunderbolt is becoming the philosophy of America itself. Brute endurance, relentless production, quantity turned into quality by sheer persistence. Every day, cargo ships unload new planes at British ports. Every day, new pilots arrive from states they can barely pronounce. Every day, the assembly lines back home roar 24 hours straight, stamping out another jug, another engine, another chance. By the end of 1943, the skies over Europe hum with them. The same shape that once made the Luftwaffe laugh now casts a shadow long enough to darken the entire continent. And still, deeper changes are coming. Because soon, this monster will stop guarding the bombers and start hunting on its own. The P-47 will learn to fight a new war, not in the heavens, but down in the mud, among tanks and trains, where its roar becomes a sound that freezes men's blood. Spring, 1944. Northern France trembles under the weight of an invisible storm. The Luftwaffe still flies, but it no longer rules. Its pilots climb into the sky each morning like condemned men. They know that somewhere above, the Thunderbolts are waiting. The Americans have changed their game. They no longer think in terms of jewels or chivalry. Now it's math, fuel, altitude, and industry. The boom and zoom doctrine has turned every Thunderbolt into a predator. At 30,000 feet, P-47s patrol in loose, lazy circles. Below, B-17 bombers crawl toward their targets. And even further down, the fields of France are scattered with trains, convoys, tanks, the nervous system of Hitler's army. That's where the real war is about to move. Because the Thunderbolt's greatest secret isn't in the sky. It's in how it brings the sky down to earth. By early 1944, the Republic factory in Farmingdale, Long Island, is a machine that eats raw metal and spits out monsters. A new jug rolls off the line every hour, each one larger, meaner, and more heavily armed than the last. The latest variant, the P-47D, can carry a payload that makes the Luftwaffe's eyes widen in disbelief. 2 1,000-pound bombs under the wings, and a third under the belly, plus 10 5-inch high-velocity rockets. It's not a fighter anymore. It's a flying battleship. The Americans call it fighter bomber. The Germans invent a darker word. Jabo. Jagdbomber. To them, it becomes a curse. June 1944. The invasion of Normandy. The first wave of Thunderbolts lifts off from southern England before dawn. Their wings glint red in the rising sun. Engines thunder across the countryside. Thousands of horses roaring under aluminum skins. Ground crews wave them off, their faces streaked with oil and sleeplessness. From the beaches below, German troops see the sky fill with dots. Dozens, then hundreds. At first they think it's bombers. Then they hear the sound. The deep, pulsing growl of the R-2800 engine, dropping lower and lower. And they understand. The Jabos have come. They attack in packs, screaming down from the clouds like mechanical vultures. Rockets whistle past church steeples. Bombs slam into rail yards, bridges, and supply trucks. 8 50 caliber guns rake the roads, tearing men and metal alike. A panzer column near Caen tries to scatter. It's hopeless. The first rocket hits the lead tank. A burst of light, then a bloom of black smoke. The rest are trapped on the narrow road, perfect targets. The Thunderbolts dive again, engines howling. The sound becomes unbearable, a vibration that rattles bones, shreds nerves. In the chaos, one German infantryman drops his rifle and screams, "Jabos!" The word spreads through the ranks like a contagion. Soon, psychologists in the Wehrmacht have a name for it. Jabo fever. Jabo fever. A new kind of terror, where every distant engine rumble makes soldiers dive for cover. Even when the skies are empty, they still hear the roar in their heads. By mid-July, the numbers are staggering. In just a few weeks, the Thunderbolts of the 9th Air Force destroy thousands of vehicles and choke off every major road feeding the front. Rail yards are cratered ruins. Fuel depots burn for days. Colonel Hubert Zemke, now a legend among the American fighter groups, studies reconnaissance photos and can't quite believe it. Where once there were highways full of trucks and tanks, there are only black scars. He writes in his diary, "The Luftwaffe is gone. The roads are ours." The German army begins to fight not just the enemy above, but gravity itself. It cannot move, cannot breathe. In the ruined fields of Normandy, a panzer commander named Kurt Wessel watches his men dig in for the night. The sky is calm. Then he hears it. Distant, thunder. It's not weather. The sound grows. The air starts to tremble. The men freeze. "Engines," someone whispers. Vessel looks up. Nothing. Then he sees them. Black shapes glinting in the sunlight. He barely has time to shout before the first rockets hit. His tanks vanish in a roar of flame. When the smoke clears, there's nothing left but twisted steel and silence. Meanwhile, in London, Allied commanders watch the reports flood in. Every bridge destroyed, every convoy eliminated. Each line of text another wound in the German war machine. The P-47 has become the hammer of industrial warfare. Its pilots are no longer just airmen. They are executioners of logistics. The numbers tell the story better than any poem could. Between D-Day and VE Day, Thunderbolt pilots destroy 86,000 railroad cars, 9,000 locomotives, 6,000 armored vehicles, and 68,000 trucks. The Luftwaffe can no longer protect its army. The army can no longer move. And for the first time since 1939, German soldiers look up at the sky not for rescue, but for judgment. Down in the villages of Normandy, French farmers learn to read the sounds of the engines. The low, steady hum of bombers means fear. The sharp, throaty growl of the Jug means hope. One boy later recalls, "We would hide when we heard the jarbos, then cheer when we saw the black smoke on the road, because we knew the Germans were burning." Across the Channel, newspaper headlines call it the Thunderbolt Summer. But for the Luftwaffe, it's something else entirely. The season of extinction. Every new German pilot who takes off knows he's unlikely to land. The training schools are emptying. The fuel reserves are gone. The old aces are dead or exhausted. They can still fly, still fight, but the war has already left them behind. In late 1944, the thunder of the R-2800 becomes the soundtrack of apocalypse. The P-47's silhouette, broad wings, round nose, the faint gleam of bare aluminum, becomes the final image burned into 1,000 German memories. Factories, trains, fuel depots, everything burns. And somewhere among the smoke, a single truth hangs in the air like gunpowder. The Americans didn't just win the skies. They changed what winning meant. By the winter of 1944, the sound of the Thunderbolt has become the pulse of the war itself. Over France, over Belgium, over the frozen forests of the Ardennes, that deep engine rumble echoes like the heartbeat of an empire made of metal. Germany, once the architect of mechanized warfare, is now being devoured by it. The Luftwaffe is dying, and it's not dying in a blaze of glory. It's dying of exhaustion. The American pilots still face danger, but the pattern of the war has shifted. The enemy in the sky is no longer a formation of German fighters. It's the weather, the distance, and the endless grind of missions that never seem to end. The Thunderbolt has become routine, an extension of the industrial will that built it. Every flight, every bomb, every bullet is part of a process, a mechanical rhythm that the axis cannot break. At its heart, this is the war of philosophies. Germany's air power was built around elite mastery, small numbers of highly trained aces flying exquisite machines. America's was built around industry, the belief that anything, no matter how complex, could be produced on an assembly line, standardized, multiplied, and improved through scale. One side worshipped the craftsman, the other worshipped the factory. The P-47 is the perfect expression of that divide. It is not elegant, but it is invincible. It's not subtle, but it's inexhaustible. In 1940, the German pilot school trained masters. Each candidate flew hundreds of hours before even touching combat. By late 1944, that luxury is gone. Fuel is scarce, instructors are dead, and the new generation goes to battle with barely 100 hours of flight time. They take off knowing they will meet the Thunderbolt, and knowing they are outnumbered, outgunned, and outclimbed. Their aircraft, once symbols of precision, are now fragile, short-ranged, and starving for fuel. Meanwhile, the Americans are producing more pilots in a single year than Germany can train in 5. Back in the United States, the assembly lines never sleep. At Republic Aviation, the night shift moves like clockwork. Sparks fly as riveters hammer the skin onto new fuselages. Every 12 hours, another P-47 rolls out. At Pratt Whitney, workers in grease-stained overalls mount another R-2800 engine into a crate, stenciled with a destination: Liverpool. Every factory is part of a living machine. Men and women, Rosie the riveters, teenage apprentices, veterans too old to fight, all of them build death in the name of life. A government inspector once asked Alexander Kartveli how many Thunderbolts his factory could build per day. The engineer shrugged. "As many as you can feed us metal." That was not arrogance, it was reality. By 1944, America's industrial production dwarfs that of all Axis powers combined. German intelligence reports describe it in despairing terms. For every fighter we destroy, 3 take its place. The irony is sharp. The Luftwaffe's philosophy of quality over quantity had once brought them victory. Now it seals their defeat. They have built perfect machines, but they cannot build enough of them. They have trained elite pilots, but they cannot replace them. The Thunderbolt, meanwhile, is built to be replaceable, modular, and eternal. When one crashes, the ground crews have another ready within days. When a pilot is lost, another steps in with the same training, the same manuals, the same procedures. The individual no longer defines the war. The system does. German ace Günter Röhl once said bitterly, "We fought men, they sent machines." He meant it as an insult, but that was precisely the point. The Americans had turned war into logistics, destruction into a science. Every Thunderbolt that rolled out of Farmingdale was not just a plane. It was an equation. Horsepower multiplied by altitude, multiplied by steel, multiplied by willpower. In the final months of 1944, the Luftwaffe throws everything it has into the sky. Me-109s, FW-190s, even the new Me-262 jets. They fight bravely, desperately. But it's too late. The Thunderbolts swarm in such numbers that the jet advantage means nothing. When one falls, 10 replace it. The sky belongs to the jug. Even the German generals know it. In one intercepted report, a Luftwaffe officer writes, "Our losses are no longer tactical. They are structural. The enemy's industry is our enemy." And that is the final revelation. The P-47 is not just a fighter. It's the industrial world taking shape as a weapon. The culmination of assembly lines, oil refineries, shipping routes, and mathematics. The plane is not born of genius alone, but of organization, patience, and scale. In December 1944, during the Battle of the Bulge, the snow over the Ardennes turns red. When the weather clears, hundreds of Thunderbolts rise like a storm unleashed. They pound the German counterattack into dust. Tanks vanish under rocket fire. Trucks erupt in fireballs. The last offensive of the Reich collapses under the weight of mass production. The legend of Blitzkrieg, fast, precise, unstoppable, ends under the reign of the Yabos. And yet, within that destruction, there is a strange beauty, the brutal symmetry of it all. The war that began with the Luftwaffe's domination now ends with its mirror image. American steel wings blotting out the sun. Every weapon is also a message. The P-47's message is simple and final. You cannot outfight a system that builds faster than you can destroy. As Germany's factories lie in ruins, as its pilots fall and its airfields turn to mud, the Thunderbolt flies on. It no longer has rivals, only targets. The Americans no longer fear losing the sky. They fear only the silence that will follow, when there's no one left to fight. The war is entering its last act. The P-47 has done its job too well. It has cleared the skies, crushed the enemy's transport, and broken the myth of the Luftwaffe. Soon, another machine, sleeker, faster, longer ranged, will arrive to finish the work. The Mustang will carry the bombers all the way to Berlin. But even as the headlines shift, every pilot knows the Thunderbolt built the road they're flying on. When the war ends, the factories will fall silent, the assembly lines will slow, and the men who built the monster will go home. But the idea will remain, that wars are not won by heroes alone, but by those who can build faster, farther, and forever. The empire of metal will not fade when the guns stop. It will only change its shape. May 1945. The war is ending, though no one in the air believes it yet. Over the ruins of Germany, the smoke drifts upward like exhausted prayers. Cities that once glowed with factories now lie flattened. Rail lines twist through craters and forests of wrecked metal. The sky, once the blood-soaked frontier of Europe, is empty. At a small airfield outside Frankfurt, rows of Thunderbolts sit wing to wing, their engines quiet, their paint dulled by soot and rain. Mechanics move slowly now, without urgency. There are no more missions to fly, no more convoys to destroy. The men who survived walk between the planes in silence, their boots crunching on gravel that still smells of gasoline and gunpowder. Lieutenant Tex Reynolds stands beside his jug, tracing a finger over the bullet holes that have been patched and painted a dozen times. He remembers the laughter, the first mission, the chaos, the disbelief. He remembers friends who didn't come back. The noise of 8 guns turning the sky into a furnace. He remembers the German ace who saluted before vanishing into cloud. Now there is only quiet. A wind moves through the open hangar, lifting dust and scraps of paper. Someone starts the generator, and for a moment the deep mechanical hum echoes again. That sound that once meant life and death, victory and annihilation. Then it fades. The pilots gather for one last briefing. There are no maps this time, no red arrows, no target lists. Just orders to fly home. The war is over. That night, the base celebrates in half-hearted joy. There's whiskey, music, laughter that doesn't quite reach the eyes. Tex walks out to the flight line, a bottle in hand. The moonlight glints on rows of silent machines. He takes a drink and mutters, "They called her a milk jug." Then he smiles. Guess she had some kick in her. Across Europe, in shattered towns and burnt fields, people step out of cellars and ruins. The sound that once made them tremble, that deep, rolling thunder, is gone. For the first time in years, the sky belongs to silence. In the days that follow, Allied intelligence compiles its final reports. The numbers are staggering. The Luftwaffe, once the terror of Europe, has ceased to exist as a coherent force. The factories that built its planes are rubble. The fuel that powered them is gone. Its best pilots are dead, its new ones barely trained. When historians later ask what destroyed the Luftwaffe, German General Adolf Galland gives a simple answer: we lost the war of production. The Thunderbolts and Mustangs, they were the hammers of an industrial god. The P-47 ends the war with more than 500,000 combat sorties. 15,000 built, thousands still flying. It becomes the icon of the machine age, proof that strength and persistence can outlast elegance and precision. The laughter that greeted its first appearance over France has long since turned into respect, even awe. But its story doesn't end there. In 1972, in a different war and a different century, the same philosophy takes shape again. The Fairchild Republic A-10 Thunderbolt II, the Warthog, rolls onto the runway. Another ungainly beast, thick-skinned, slow and ugly. The engineers call it the spiritual successor to the P-47. Built not for beauty, but for survival. Built to protect those on the ground. Built to finish what others start. The name Thunderbolt lives again, because the idea behind it never died. Wars change, weapons evolve, but the lesson remains the same. The greatest victories belong not to those who fight with grace, but to those who fight with endurance. The P-47 was never meant to impress. It was meant to endure, to outlast, to outfight by sheer force of will and steel. The men who flew it, many of them barely older than boys, didn't think of themselves as heroes. They thought of themselves as survivors, inside a storm of metal. They learned that victory wasn't about the perfect shot or the elegant maneuver. It was about coming home in one piece. When the last Thunderbolt leaves Europe, its propeller spinning against the dawn, it carries with it more than the story of a plane. It carries the truth of an era. That the industrial heart of America didn't just build machines. It built destiny. They laughed at it once. Then they feared it. And in the end, they understood it. The jug had done what it was born to do. It didn't win by grace or beauty. It won by weight, noise, and fire. It won because it refused to die. The skies grow still again, and for a moment Europe breathes. The last echo of the R-2800 fades into silence. The silence after the storm.